Hello and welcome back. We've got Ryan Grant returning to discuss reimagining general meetings and the journey to hybrid strata governance. Hey, Ryan.
Hello, Tom.
Great to have you. This is a good topic. We've been talking a lot about education, we've been talking a lot about engagement, and this is something that makes sure that everyone in a community is well informed and able to participate in the ways that their strata decides to proceed. So, very glad to have you back. Before we get into it, I know you've got a slide on yourself and what you're doing with Property Flute to work through this issue.
Yes.
Please take it away.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having us again. Love to be here. And I'm Ryan Grant. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Property Flute. Property Flute is a strata meeting management and voting solution provider. We help the stratas run their general meetings, any type, annual or special, and we can do it in person, online, or hybrid scenarios. We have BC-based SBA tailored kind of solutions so that people can have confidence that when they run the meeting, that it's going to be done according to how BC wants it done. And the Strat Property Act, everyone needs to be able to comply, right? And then we run BC Stratec. It's a passion project of ours where we help showcase BC-based solutions, so technology solutions and also governance solutions. And then we cover as well different types of industry related topics so that it's nice and holistic, teaches people about what softwares they can use that are tailored for stratas and what other kind of services are out there, along with legal topics as well. We bring on lawyers and stuff.
Fantastic. And moving to today's educational topic, it's why we want to reimagine strata meetings.
Yes, exactly. So, why do we want to do this? There's going to be many questions out there for people that weren't around when this kind of change happened, which was COVID. So, COVID really kicked off this whole big chapter of kind of revolutionizing the strata industry for the meeting aspect. People traditionally were used to the in-person meetings, but nowadays, as we can see on my slide, there's many options, right? You have the traditional in-person, which is what everyone used pre-COVID and still is popular today in many ways. And then electronically enabled in-person, which will cover what that means, and online, which is the most used one as well that we're seeing that's adopted in today, right? Just doing online only meetings where people meet online through traditional means like Zoom and Teams and all those other kind of platforms. And then there's dual attendance hybrid, which is going to be a hybrid type meeting where you have in person and online attendance. And we'll go through, why do those exist and how they came to be.
Fantastic. Yeah, I can see that last one being a bit complicated to manage,
Yeah.
but
And
I'll let you get through that. I mean, obviously, we all remember what happened and the inability
yes.
to get together, but take us back. What used to happen?
Yeah, so we used to have in-person only meetings, and it was very rare for anyone to ever speak of an online-based meeting. The workflows weren't really designed back then, pre-COVID, and even during COVID. They just didn't exist, and everyone just met in person. They would have to think about accessibility, meaning that where are you going to go? So they had to plan months in advance to get the rooms booked, and in areas like Metro Vancouver, sometimes the areas will get booked really quick by those stratas and other organizations when the season kind of hits for all these meetings to go off, right? A lot of stratas have their meetings all kind of bunched together in a clustered area, so accessibility was sometimes a competing issue for them. I've heard of many managers speak about the stress of having to do that planning. But sometimes there was definitely really good things about in-person meetings and going there and meeting all your other owners. But it was quite stressful to sometimes plan them, right? Especially for larger groups, there's fewer options to rent rooms, right? And then quorum, that was an issue too. So people would have these big properties, and then nobody would show up because they just didn't want to have the fuss of traveling to go out and go to the place and sit there at the venue, right? So quorum was an issue. For some, maybe not, right? Some communities are really good and active and they love going out, and it's kind of like a event for them, right? Like to go meet the neighbors and stuff, and things are pretty cordial, right? If nothing's too controversial, then they actually really enjoy once a year to go out and hang out. They have like barbecues and stuff too.
I wonder if there's something related to not only the demographics of a community, but also the sort of size and shape of one. Almost the
Mm,
larger a community gets, the less connected you feel, the less you feel like you need to show up to vote. I mean, I just have that sense that somehow it's kind of inversely related, and the larger communities might have struggled more to get active participation.
yeah, exactly, right. I mean, we ourselves don't even have enough data on that because it feels like there's always different types of people in different stratas, and you just can't really get a good feel for how many want to still do in person versus how many want to do online. It really comes down to your community, is what we've seen, right? We've really seen that. Some people embrace online kind of activities, but some really like in person. And then for them, maybe the hybrid options are better and stuff. But in general, each strata is unique and needs to be handled, the way that the community wants, right? What's best for the community, right? And pre-COVID, everyone just didn't have options; they had to do in person. So that was all there was, and that's why quorum was sometimes an issue. But then also at meetings they had to do registration. They would have tables, and people would come, line up, and get through the registration periods. That was pretty efficient, actually. Online registration sometimes is not viewed as being as efficient, especially if you're just using something like Zoom. You're not going to always trust that the people showing up are the actual people that should be there, right? You're not there to check ID. It's very hard to be able to check driver's licenses or something like that. You could do that in person quite easily, right?
Yeah,
And quickly. But
good point.
online, you need to have other types of mechanisms, which we'll go over later. But in general, that's kind of one of the things that was a pain point as well at during the transition period into the online world. And then voting types, right? When you're at these in-person meetings, typically things were verbal votes and just quickly getting through the agenda. Maybe the show of hands quickly, right? But usually it's just all in favor, yay, nay, right? Abstain.
Yeah,
And then when people wanted precise counts, that's when things got a little brutal for time, right? And for confidence in the votes. They would usually want to, if something's really contentious and it's a larger group, then they would want to probably have scrutineers to make sure that whoever's helping count is doing a accurate job, right? Counting the voting cards, or doing a roll call, which is extremely lengthy. So roll calls, they will call out people's names and ask them how do they wish to vote, and it also exposes the person, right? So the anonymity is not really there, unless you do secret ballot, which was an extremely lengthy process, and you need to do it very by the book, which the Strat Property Act doesn't quite tell you, doesn't explain the perfect scenario how to do it, but we've seen through court cases that they explain what they want to see right done at these secret ballots, and they're quite laborious to set up. You got to prepare for them, because if you're not prepared and somebody calls for a secret ballot in person, well then you might be able to throw the meeting if it's not done correctly, right, according to
right.
proper procedures. And then minutes, right? Those were something people sometimes stressed about in in-person meetings because you can't record them usually, right? There wasn't really a way that people easily recorded in-person meetings. And you could probably set up a camera and stuff, but most people just, they wouldn't think of doing that, and they just have a secretary or someone trying to take the minutes and relying on them, right, and hoping that they do a good job.
Yeah. I mean, that worked for several decades, but there are better ways to go about things, and a shove in the right direction has
Yes.
kind of brought us to a point where that's possible. Uh, we all know we couldn't get together, Ryan. So what happened?
Yeah. So there were basically workflows and everything that needed to be figured out because people weren't able to get together, and emergency orders were permitted by the government. So they said temporarily we're going to override any of the bylaws that people have that talk about how they run their meetings, because nobody had a bylaw usually that had electronic meeting attendance in their bylaws, right? So they had to kind of come up with that from the government level and supersede all the stratas to say, hey guys, you can, like, don't worry about a bylaw, just go run your meetings, right? And they didn't know how they were going to achieve that, but uh, through lawyers and CHOA and VIZOA, all these associations, they helped kind of come up with some pretty decent workflows, right, for the stratas. But there were still quite a bit of gaps, right, of how to do these things really effectively and have real good confidence, right? To do it effectively would take a lot of labor and a lot of time potentially for the larger groups or the complicated stratas, fractional voting stratas that are commercial stratas typically. Those ones are a nightmare to manage just through the Zoom. You can't use the Zoom poll feature. You need to independently do roll calls basically. So it's very lengthy, laborious, and scrutineers, all that stuff, right? It just adds a lot of overhead and people don't find it that fun. So the idea of the online meeting is great, but then people are like, oh man, I got that AGM coming up and it's going to be, 6 hours, right? And they don't enjoy that, right? And they walk
That
away not
that's
having
not fun, Ryan.
confidence.
Nobody
No,
wants to go to a 6-hour meeting.
no.
Even half that is pressing it, isn't it?
Exactly. I mean, we've had clients that had up 2-day meetings, up to 14 hours, right? And then they use our type of platform, they shrink it down to around 4.5 hours, right? So they carved out a lot of time and were able to bring their communities together. And that's what you can do with a proper kind of solution, right? If you're using just Zoom, small stratas, they can get by with it typically, but the larger ones, it's quite cumbersome. uh,
Very much so. So
and
the light went on. You
yeah, the
said
light
there's
went
gotta be
on.
a way that we can deal with this. What are these
Yes.
challenges and how did you tackle them?
Well, first we thought it was going to be easier than imagined. Obviously, when you're first getting into things, you're like, "Oh, how hard could it be to make a voting solution?" Right? And then we went and started really getting into the weeds of it, talking to strata managers, and even brought on a strata manager on our company, and we found out pretty quickly within a few months that, hey, this, the prototype that we built needed to be quite more robust to handle all these scenarios, right? And there's quite a few other edge case scenarios. It doesn't apply to maybe 60 or 70% of stratas, but for those 30%, 40% of them, um, it it makes a big difference, right? It can really help them speed up their productivity. So we had to go through and figure out, how do we ensure we're constantly tracking the quorum? How do we make sure that we're complying and not doing something like restricted proxies? Because during COVID, people were coming up with workarounds called restricted proxies, where they would almost do like an advanced vote ballot, right? They use their proxy as like a ballot, and that's not something that they can do, right? The Strata Property Act doesn't allow for advanced voting or anything like that. So people were, getting confused and rolling out this restricted proxy kind of workflow, and the government and and the associations had to really get on top of that to advocate and tell people, please don't do restricted proxies. It's not legal to do, right? You can't do it. uh, and some even went to the CRT, right? They had court cases, throwing out their AGMs because people were using restricted proxies. And then we had to figure out fractional votes, right? Making sure that people in those commercial units are able to vote, and handling multiple owners. And because sometimes multiple owners come to a meeting and they should be sharing one vote, or how many votes that their unit is supposed to have, right? They shouldn't be duplicate voting. We had to make sure that we uh, don't allow multiple people to kind of sign on for one unit. And then observer support, right? Again, those multiple owners or other family members or whatever that come to the meetings, they need to be able to observe and not participate in the voting, right? So we need to make sure that was all set up properly, which you can't do on something like Zoom. They don't allow segregating certain people to be voting only in certain things, and Zoom doesn't support fractional votes. All those types of things, right, that make it complicated. And proxy support, that's the biggest one. Where maybe most stratas don't have people that own multiple units, but they have people that have 5 proxies, right? That's a common thing. They'll have a few proxies that they
Very
go
much. Yeah.
and they have to vote with that. So we needed to support all these kind of different angles and section stratas as well, right? That's something you're going to be doing bylaw amendments. You got to make sure you get input from both sides, the residential and the non-residential, right, on certain things. So we had to build all that into the platform, which Zoom doesn't handle on its own. So that's why Zoom is good for 60% of stratas probably in BC, right? Most of the stratas in BC are
Yeah.
quite
The
small,
smaller ones. It's more
and they
simple.
can get around and they can come up with workflows to kind of mitigate, and it doesn't take too much longer. But ones beyond 15 units, they start to kind of need platforms, and into the 40, 50 unit plus, you really want to have a good platform to streamline things, right?
Definitely. Definitely. So where are we now?
Well, now the owners expect the flexibility because they've heard of all these things, right, from family friends that live in different stratas, or from the organizations like Choa and Vizoa that are talking about how to run meetings. So people know that there's options to do it, and they expect, like, oh, I'm going to go on vacation. I want to be able to join my AGM and not have to, um, you know, plan my vacation around the AGM per se, right? They can all go take some time off in their hotel room, for a few hours to go to the meeting. That's fine, but they don't want to have to say, oh no, we got to push the whole vacation out a week because we really need to be there and support our strata, right? Most owners wouldn't, right? Most owners don't understand the complexity of what the council and the management are doing, having to run the place, so they don't usually care as much to come to these meetings, right? It's harder to get people to show up because they don't quite understand what goes into running the complex, right? So
Sure.
to them, if it's easy to join, sure, they'll do it, right? If it's going to be cumbersome, then they're not as flexible, right? So they want the flexibility from the strata to make it easy for them to say, yeah, okay, I'll show up, right?
Yeah.
Especially if there's nothing contentious, right? If it's kind of pretty streamlined, then just coming there to chat about various things. You want to make it as easy as possible to try and get more turnout, right, and have people
Yeah.
engaged to talk about things, and try and hopefully get more council members too, right, during the nominations.
Of
And
course.
they expect the proxy management. So from the accessibility aspect being online, then proxy management, like we talked about, they want to be able to run, you know, 5, 6 proxies all seamlessly, right? When voting, they want to have granular voting options for each one, so they don't want it where it's just, one option for all saying yes, no, or abstain, right? They want to granularly be able to go through because maybe the proxy that they're representing wanted them to vote differently than the majority of the other ones that they're holding, right? So there needs to be options to quickly do that, right?
Sure.
And they expect that, and then multi-unit owner voting support. So then again, if there's an owner who owns multiple units, they need to be able to submit for multiple units too, right? And make it done in an easy way, quick and easy way, right? Using Zoom, you're gonna not be able to use the Zoom poll to collect those, so you're gonna have to do roll call basically. It's gonna take time. Streamline faster meetings, right? So that's a big one as well for our clients. It's not always as effective because they come and then they talk a lot, right? They have to deliberate about these items, and that usually eats up the bulk of the meeting. Is just discussing at our client meetings, right? The voting is very quick, right? In a minute or so, you've collected from a whole group of 100 people all their votes. It's very streamlined and quick, right? But in general, the theory of running electronically enabled meetings is that you will streamline faster roll call based kind of votes, right? Or anonymous votes very fast. And then council members, they want to try and get more people on, and they want to be more open to digital solutions again, right? So that's where we're seeing the councils exploring, even though they may sometimes be afraid of these solutions when, can our ownership really use this kind of complicated setup, to them they think it's going to be complicated, but in the end it's usually not as complicated and scary as they think it was originally going to be, right? So once
Yeah,
they go through, see demos of different solutions, then they pick one, and usually they're pretty good, right? As long as they pick one like ours that's designed for a strata use case, right? Then it makes it
exactly.
much more user friendly. And then legal frameworks, right? So the government overrode everybody and put that temporary workaround in as a permanent workaround, saying now it's part of the standard bylaws, right? So we accommodate electronic meetings by default in BC. And the industry shift again. We went from temporary to strategic meeting management, where the associations and management companies are trying to enhance the user experience and for their own staff too. It used to take a long time and a lot of money for the management companies to have to get managers to go out to all these in-person meetings, right? It takes up a lot of overhead, especially running multiple on the same day. I heard of stories where people used to do that, and then they're driving across town and hoping that the meeting ends at the right time, right?
Property
Uh,
management is not for the faint of heart.
no, exactly, right? But now these solutions make their life a little bit easier, in most cases, right? And owners, they want audible results. So that's the big thing about either in
Definitely.
person or online meetings without a proper platform. If you don't have a platform that is tracking all the tallying of the votes and how the votes are cast, then they don't have as much confidence, right? Because it's such a laborious task to try and
It
collect
is,
the
and this
votes
this
on
speaks
something
to
that is
that transparency angle, Ryan, that you and I have talked
yes,
about before, and that we've discussed with many others. People want that transparency; they want that accountability. Having very clear answers on how votes went is important.
yes, super important to some. We found that it makes all the difference actually, where some of our clients, the meetings, like at first they thought, oh, we want to get this because of the meeting time. But in the end, did they really save a lot of time? Not necessarily because they were talking a lot, right? But they found that the best thing about it was that they got to discuss calmly. People were not focused on the voting aspect, they were focused on just discussing the items,
Discussion.
right? They
Good.
didn't, the people that used to always be so contradictory and fighting with the chair and the management company and saying cruel things to them, um, they that was all eliminated and the people got to focus on the agenda, right? So that they found was one of the biggest things that they loved about using kind of those solutions.
Excellent.
And yeah, here we go, nice little overview of what is available today. So we
You
said,
mentioned them earlier, but now we're going into the
yeah,
detail.
we're
You know,
going
like
into the
what does this
weeds a
actually
bit,
mean, and
right?
what is the
Exactly. So traditional in-person voting, you have the paper registration, manual voting typically. It's more for the elderly communities, at least from our client base. When clients choose not to go with us, that it's because they think, oh, we just have too many elderly people that we don't feel would be able to go with it. And it's sad to see because actually most of our clients are from the elderly communities, which is they're like 55 plus communities and they do fine. But some clients, the council members are just so afraid of it and they back away from it, right? And they go, no, we want to do in person only. Sorry, we'll check it out in a few years again or something, right? And again, many smaller stratas, they're fine in person. That's okay if that's what they like to do, then great. And the complexity of those is low, right? So they typically can kind of wing things and go with the flow on the fly and don't have to prepare as much. They can look up things quickly in their documents if they have their spreadsheets around and whatnot. But typically, it's a lower complexity, easier, less stress in many ways. But like we said, if you're running the really big meetings, that's when the stress and complexity comes in. But since
yeah, the drawbacks of that in-person meeting again are finding your venue,
yeah,
people having to dedicate the time to make it to that space at that
exactly,
dedicated time. And yes, you're trying to accommodate certain and all of your strata ownership group.
yes,
So the case for accommodating some elderly participants with an in-person meeting is good, but you may be also making it more difficult for them in other ways if they have
yes,
to travel to an offsite destination, or make those other considerations. So
Exactly. And that's why the participation again is low or moderate, because the people can't always make it out, right? Sometimes the parking is limited as well. We heard of some stories where people were driving around looking for parking, they missed a quarter of the meeting, right? Right, very dense areas, right, that they can't go. And it's far enough that you need to drive, right? You can't just walk to these places. You need to drive 10 minutes or 15 minutes to get there, right? So it is cumbersome, and you have low to moderate turnout in these. Is what we've seen and heard from our clients too. And then you have electronically enabled in-person meetings. So these are another form of a hybrid meeting. There's actually two hybrid meetings that people can think of, and this is one of them. So electronically enabled is something that people never actually really think of, which is to go to a meeting in person, but enable it with an electronic platform. So people sit in the audience with their phone and they can vote on their phone. And it's just for the people that show up at the meeting. So you go to an in person meeting and you bring your smartphone or tablet, you connect to the Wi Fi or use your cellular, and you can vote through your device right there live at the meeting. So you can
this
talk to
is
people
not
in
that
person.
new of a concept, Ryan. I'm old enough to have gone to Expo '86, and there was something called Color Wars where you sat in your seat and you
Yeah.
voted with this like 4-button
Yeah.
remote. This was
Yeah.
not a
Yeah.
cell phone, but you were there and you had a control pad. It was an
Yes.
electronically enabled in-person voting.
Yeah.
So the concept is not
It's
new.
not
The
new, no.
application is great to see,
Yes,
and obviously that does provide a window for participation with reduced hassle. Like you get that precise count on your votes
yes,
without having to do a roll call or go through some of those
exactly.
other steps that you talked about.
Because that's the problem with a lot of the other those electronic in-person solutions, which is why we rarely see it at the strata meetings. Because if
Yeah,
people own multiple units or proxies and they got like four different or how many different remotes to try and submit a for their different stratas that they have to submit for, it can become quite cumbersome, right, to control that. And if there's fractional votes, I'm not sure how those systems fully handle that. but but in general, with specialized solutions, it makes it more capable. But people don't think about it. But when we talk about it to our clients, they go, "Oh wow, we only thought we would do an online meeting, but now that we know about that, maybe we will plan the next year for in person, electronically enabled, or go hybrid, like full hybrid of actual the dual attendance type, right? That the most common kind of hybrid phrase that people use, right? In person and online attendance.
yeah.
Best of both
Because this one
worlds.
still has the drawback of everyone having to be there in person, and that means you
Exactly.
get low turnout and low attendance relative to some of the
Exactly.
other
We don't
options.
like they ask sometimes, oh, is this going to solve our quorum problems? And we say, well, actually,
No,
no solution will solve the quorum problems entirely. Some people think, oh, if we just bring online solution, go online, we'll get high turnout, and that's not always the case. We've seen it with our clients that like every client has always gotten quorum that we've had, but sometimes they were shocked, like, oh, we actually didn't get as much turnout this year as previous years, and it's hit and miss. Some are repeat clients. Sometimes the first year that they use us is really good. Second year is a little bit lower, or third year is a little bit lower, right? But in general, they're
interesting.
usually higher. Yeah, but it's not
Yeah,
a.
I mean, I
It's not,
find that kind of curious. You would think that the added flexibility would result in higher turnout.
it's also about what's on the agenda. So that's what we learned is
Right.
sometimes if it's contentious items, then you get higher turnout regardless, right? But if it's not,
Really? That special levy,
yeah, yeah, that does it, right? But we found like one of our clients that used to had, really it was like 80% engagement from the strata, which is huge. One year they had around maybe 60%, and then they were going, wow, what happened? And then we evaluated with them. They did a survey internally, and yeah, it was because there was nothing really important on the agenda. So people are like, yeah, things are going good. I
I
don't need
would
to really
say
show up.
that most stratas would be pretty thrilled with 60%
I know.
participation.
But this one was shocked because they're like, usually we have, close to 80%. And that one time, the first time they used us was around 80%, right? So that's why, it could be shocking, and we're not there to guarantee that, we're going to get you the best quorum ever, right? But we do hope that enabling you with the best tools and options and flexibility gives you, that ability to try and get a good quorum. It's on the council and the community to really market themselves to say, come on, guys, come on out to
Yeah.
these meetings. We need your support. We need you out here. We need to talk about items, right? And brainstorm. We don't want people coming to us last minute, complaining about the special levy that's coming up in 2 years, right? We want to talk about it today, right? So it
Yeah.
takes engagement from providing software doesn't solve everything. You have to have still the people, right? You need people there to manage the strata and bring awareness to people to get them out. And then
Definitely.
online meetings, which is
I
everyone
I
knows
really
that.
think looking at this grid that you've got, that the combination of, low to high complexity and moderate to high participation suggests that this is a compelling option for
Yes,
stratas, especially of size.
yes, it is in general, especially. Like the small stratas, when they contact us, they do ask about online options, right? And they like them. They sometimes talk about hybrid, but it's very expensive too, right? Hybrid option is expensive for small stratas. For large stratas, hybrid options are good. They can eat the cost pretty easily. If it's 200 units or more, it's frivolous to do it, right? You can do it for quite cost effective means, a few bucks extra a person gets you that hardware that you need and the on-site location, right? To be able
Right.
to run those.
Yeah.
But in general, still, yeah, online for most of our clients is the popular one. They're a little hesitant and or don't want to spend the money for the hybrid aspect, but they're willing to spend it for the online aspect, right? Or the in-person. We found in-person is actually enabled in person is more popular than hybrid because they can bring people there. They don't have to pay for extra, mic gear and stuff. People can hear them clearly. That makes sense. That's the thing with hybrid. People still can't always hear things the clearest, right? You got to make sure everyone's got the mic if they're speaking. It's more
Yeah.
cumbersome, more coordination for the people in person to try and make sure that someone's running around with that mic and getting everyone to clearly say what they're wanting to talk about, right? So
And
online and electronic enabled are more popular that we
yeah,
find.
I mean, dual attendance hybrid sounds fantastic. You can
Yeah.
include those that want to be there in person. You can let people join remotely, but then it gets way more complicated because you've got
Yes.
to have those that are in the venue mic'd up and ready to ask their
Yes.
questions. You've got to connect those online. You got to track all of the different votes, and
Yes.
yeah, I can see the complexity kind of going up exponentially as you layer on
Yeah, and
the
without a
elections being able in
platform,
person and the online.
then
Yeah.
then you run into just like it would be a nightmare. I have not run into a meeting that was run hybrid natured without property flute so far. I haven't seen one. I'm sure that they do happen, but I can't imagine the nightmare of logistics for administration.
Fantastic. Okay. So
Yeah.
there we are. We're just talking about this most complex of situations.
Yes, right. The dual attendance hybrid. So some attendees online, some in person. It has high complexity for that audio visual setup synchronized process, right, for administration. And if you don't have the proper tools, it's going to be a pretty big nightmare that we think, and offers the most flexibility though to the participants. So that's the best of both worlds. Where if you can pull it off, then you're gonna go on vacation, right? You're gonna have people there, and it's gonna be best of both worlds. You bring everyone together, get the highest turnout potential, right? So that's the really big positive to it. And we've had some strategies that do that, and they love it, right? It works for them. They're more resort communities, right? Um, Electronically enabled meetings again, right? That's all in person with tech enhancements. They're there sitting with their phones, and it works out really great. And the other aspect is that you can use a platform like this to anonymize the results, so you don't have to run an official secret ballot process with a booth. You could just see if people want to do the anonymous method where they get to sit in their chair, submit their vote, and the system will keep it anonymized, right? Naturally, the system has an option which most people just use, which is basically a roll call method, right? But the system is doing it all on the back end, so people don't see how other people vote but it is in the audit trail as to how everybody voted, right? So we have a more digital kind of roll call method that allows rapid collection in a non-anonymous fashion, where the strata manager and the council can see a report as to how everybody voted, right? Or we have the anonymous mode where they can say, you know what, we want to see who showed up to the meeting, who voted at what point in time, who submitted votes, but we can't see how they voted, right? So
And
they don't.
Ryan, you've done this enough times to know what are the sorts of issues that would be worthy of a secret ballot?
Uh, Basically, when there's big contention with these special levies, right, or bylaws that are contentious, then some people feel threatened, right? And there can be threatening people in the ownership that are bullying people, right? So they go, you know what, I want a secret ballot. I don't want people to know how I'm voting, right? And sometimes, I mean, people know how you're voting, right? If you're requesting for a secret ballot, and if most of the audience kind of is like, nah, do we really want that? And you can tell, like, oh, most of them seem to be in favor of this, and this one person doesn't seem in favor, or they're requesting the secret ballot, so are they like against it, right? You can kind of guess that, but nonetheless, secret ballots are there to try and protect the community. Sometimes there are many people that are opposed, and they're like, yeah, let's just do it in a secret ballot so everyone feels protected
Who
partially,
gets to
right?
request this secret ballot?
So anyone can request it at the meeting, right? So that's why the strat manager and or council need to be prepared for secret ballots. But then if they use something like property flute and there's the anonymous option, then it scapegoats having to go through the procedures of having to set up the booth and all the other regulations around what a secret ballot entails. And most people are fine with just sitting in the audience or standing up and kind of tilting to submit their vote, right? They're more okay with that. They don't want to go through the whole process of one by one stepping up to that booth and submitting a vote. It's very laborious, right? So electronic systems cannot solve the guidelines
Yeah.
requested by a secret ballot, right? You have to take that time to go up, and it takes a long time. You have 50 people trying to vote. Imagine 50 people going up and having to, you know,
We've all been to
yeah,
voting booths before. We we know
exactly.
that
It can
this is
take
gonna
time,
be a
right?
lengthy exercise.
And if you have many
Um,
things, right, to vote on by secret ballot, it's going to be a nightmare. So the anonymous features, we've never actually had somebody ask for an official secret ballot, because once they heard the anonymous features there, they're like, oh, okay, let's do that, right? Let's
yeah.
let everyone still rapidly vote while sitting, be done in 1 minute, 2 minutes, and move on to the next item, right?
So let's recap.
Yes.
There have been some good merits explained for both in-person traditional
Yeah.
meetings and for these hybrid and electronic options that you know so much about. When might it be impractical to use those tools?
So again, most stratas, 65% of stratas are 2 to 10 units in BC. Most of them aren't really familiar with all the procedures and everything, and they, in general, do things just old school way, right? They
Yeah.
don't need to use online systems. Maybe they use Zoom. That could be, maybe they go online and just use Zoom, but they're able to manage fine, right? They don't have too many complex scenarios going on. So for small stratas, we find that they probably don't really need much software and or something like Property Flute. But Property Flute actually offers self-serve for free for stratas 15 strata lots or less. So if they wanted to
Wow.
use it, right, then they could, right? So
How
they
great is
can use
that?
it. Yeah. Because we know that, most aren't going to want to spend the money on a managed service to hire us to use it, but it still helps get the name out and helps give some good governance control for those small stratas. We don't want them to feel left out too, right? And if they're not going to be necessarily a customer of ours, we'd rather they at least have a tool to use, and maybe they'll spread the word or use it in their bigger stratas eventually, right? So it's a win-win for everybody. We love helping
I
communities
love
do
mutual wins.
that,
That's
right?
great.
So,
Fantastic. Good
but
for you.
typically they won't use it because it's kind of too robust for their needs, right?
Right,
Um,
right.
and that's
But
you're not, if you're not like section strata and stuff, you don't need typically those, but it's nice to have, right? The options there.
great. And then for the bigger communities,
Yes.
it makes a
So
lot
the,
of sense.
it makes a ton of sense. So once you go above 15 units, we notice that people do appreciate using such platforms. It really makes more sense, I would say, in the 30 unit plus. That's where we see the most value of the administration kind of gains, right? At least from our end, because we usually manage our client meetings and we do the administration aspect for them. So we see the power that this type of platform provides to our clients and to us, right? We're like, wow, we wouldn't want to have to do this, manually. um, so yeah, if you're around 30 units or greater, you start to really compound those benefits of using, right? So you're gonna be able to get through a lot of agenda items quicker, typically, right? As long as people are keeping the conversations down. And then if you have high stake bylaw amendment resolutions or special levies, right? Those things really um, need this type of stuff, right? So that people have confidence in the votes and the outcomes, right? And they can use this information for their minutes and accurately provide audit information to their ownership. If anyone wants to try and challenge and contest things, the Strata has all the data that they want, right?
Great.
Unless
Great.
things were done in anonymous mode, then the only thing that they would have is who participated in a vote, not how they voted, but who participated and how many votes there were for in favor, opposed, or abstain, right? But it gives them a lot of data, and we haven't had a client say that anyone requested to audit their meetings after. We have had some councils do the auditing because they were large groups and they said we always audit every time, but that was from the council's perspective, not from an owner reaching out to the council trying to fight them on the results, right? And even then, those larger clients that did the audits, they don't do them anymore because they've used us multiple years, many meetings, and they found, what, there's no point in spending a day or two auditing uh,
Yeah.
all the
Yeah. Yeah.
information, right?
You've got good data and you've got data you can trust.
Trust, exactly, right? So, if you have the multiple owners, observers, all those things that we talked about and they're listed here,
All the
um,
complexities.
yeah, the other aspect that isn't touched on usually is a council elections. So there's many different ways to actually conduct a council election that people aren't aware of, and our software supports the different methods that they can do for council elections. Right, everything's done by majority vote, but how you structure it can be done differently. There's different ways and flavors of doing things, right, for how they conduct their votes.
Hmm.
So we support all those, and people love using software to do that because it's a nightmare to try and nominate 17 people for only 7 seats available, right? It's quite a laborious task if you're not using a nice system.
Makes a lot of sense. And you talked about the
Yeah.
commercial ones that have those fractional. So again,
Yes. Right.
good technology
Fractional.
makes all
It's
the
like,
difference.
yeah, no brainer for those if they're especially a larger strata fractional votes and or lots of items to vote on. So the costs, right? This is the big one that people worry about, right? So again, we've made it simple where we said anything 15 or less, you're free to use it in a self-serve fashion. You can hire us to come, but you're able to do it, right? We'd rather see you be able to do it with our software than try and do it without our software. If you're gonna try and do things and have audit reports and stuff, then use our software, right? We make it easy for you to try it, right? But in traditional senses, it's low to high cost for those in-person meetings. Sometimes they have amenity rooms, right? So they don't have to pay anything. They can go downstairs and meet up. And then there's the halls that you have to rent that you can spend thousands of dollars potentially renting those big halls for super large stratas, right? And you have time constraints, right? Those are another aspect. Sometimes those halls can only be booked for a few hours and you've got 6 hour meeting. We've seen some stratas have to adjourn and come back a week later. Not fun, and the expense, right? Double the expense. And then electronically enabled. So again, no different basically than traditional in person, where you can kind of have that low to high cost. The overhead cost, obviously, usually is using a platform like us, right? If you're going to
Yeah.
bring us
Yeah.
in, then it can be more costly, right? So that does push towards the higher cost end. Then online only. So that can be low to high cost as well. Because if you're bringing in a company like us to manage it, it can be considered high cost. And if you're doing it yourself solo with just Zoom, well, there's 30, $40 or whatever for the subscription for 1 month. and you can run it fine on your own, right? But if you're running with something like Property Flute, you're probably, most kind of meeting management companies for strata sized 100 to 200 lots, you're paying $1,000 to $2,000 for that service, depending on
Yeah.
what needs to be done, plus any costs that you're spending for your strata manager if you have one, which most that are large usually have a strata management company. So they're paying for the management company to come out and help out and chair the meeting potentially, right, assisting with that and other administration stuff, and then paying for online platform like ours to come out and help, right? But
Right.
there's justified costs. It usually ends up being, $5 to $10 per person when you consider the overall cost of management time from the strata manager cost plus our time. $5-10 a unit is typical cost for running these meetings, which is not much in the long run, right? You run these
Oh,
meetings
no,
once or
it's not.
twice a year,
But I
and
know that they
it's
are
very important.
complex.
Yeah, they're
There's a
very complex.
comment from a former strata property manager we know that I will bring up here that talks about how hybrid meetings can be really, really bad
Yeah,
without good help and good tools. So thanks, Catherine, for
yeah.
sharing.
Definitely, right? And we've heard the nightmares and why they come to us to 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 say, what can you do to help with hybrid meetings, right? How do you make our life easier?
And I think
uh,
you've covered most of what you do and how you
yeah,
differentiate yourself from the standard online tools that allow people to
yes,
meet. They just have very limited controls and options because they're not meant for
for
this
that use case.
specific use case.
Exactly.
Um, so I'm not going to dwell on that
Oh,
particular slide. I do
yeah,
want to flip to the Q&A because we've had a couple of other observations made. I'm going to
for
bring
sure.
one up here that we can chat about. So Trevor Morley, who's a lawyer, has indicated that the bylaws should be addressing the conduct
Mm,
of meetings. So it's not an inherent right; it's got to
yes.
be there, and we're truncated there. It needs to be provided as an option in the bylaws. So
Yes, that's a very good point. Especially the electronic meetings need more bylaw definition, which they can reach out to a lawyer to help assist with getting those adopted, right? Because the standard bylaws were insufficient in some ways that the
yeah,
government came up with. So it's nice to see that lawyers have worked to come up with better solutions for bylaws that really enhance the meaning of a secret ballot for their communities and when they can be engaged. So yeah, it's good to that there are options for people to mitigate secret ballot use and still help uphold protections right in place to for when people want them.
true, true. Thanks for that, Trevor. And Catherine's come back saying again without tools,
Yeah.
electronic registration, not as simple as you said at the beginning, Ryan,
Yes.
as having that driver's license verification in person as
Yeah.
you're checking in, right? It's a much more complex issue.
Yes.
Um, excellent, excellent. I think that's it for some of our outside comments.
Hmm.
I wanted to talk about education
Yes.
on this call. It's something that we've talked about. There's a number of different stakeholder groups that are having a lot of talk about education. Obviously, being able to run great meetings is an important part of this. Having an
Yes.
informed ownership base before the meeting makes it much easier and much smoother. And working with great tools makes it that much more seamless when you get
Yeah.
to the actual day. Um, from your perspective, Ryan, having seen so many different communities, what is it that you wish that those strata and strata councils knew before they embarked on a dual hybrid meeting?
Well, basically, they won't understand it until they get their feet wet doing it, right? So it's like it's a chicken and egg kind of
Right,
scenario where they don't quite comprehend how complex it can be, and that's where the education through other platforms like Bizoa, Choa, or webinars like this, right, that people kind of just stay on top of and follow in the industry, or they go to workshops,
right.
right? At Groundbreaking Strata, they have great workshops for the council members along with other
Yeah,
organizations,
there's some
right?
coming up in November, actually. Everyone should
Yeah,
check those out. There'll
exactly,
be
right?
an in-person, non-dual hybrid structure. So
Yes,
go there. See what it is that Catherine tells you about running your strata and being involved because that'll be great.
exactly.
And
And they
yes,
can
thank you for
communicate
mentioning
with
that.
with other stratas. That's the other thing. People sometimes get isolated and they don't venture out to find, what are other stratas doing. But the ones that do, they really benefit from it. We actually received some feedback the other day on an article we wrote, and the person said, so glad you guys are covering so many of these great things. And uh, we actually went out and connected with other groups in the community. So they have like a monthly meetup in Victoria where they're getting together with different stratas, and they're sharing stories, right? And trying to
Good.
collaborate and figure out how are people managing and doing these things, and helping out each other collaboratively through different stratas, right? So it's
We
nice to
need
see.
that. There's over
Yeah,
30,000 communities in this province, and
yeah.
most
So
of
need
them are
to
on the small end,
share.
as you've covered. But there's a lot that we should be learning from one another, and we should be sharing, so that we end up having better experiences. If I can recap, Ryan, your talk
Yes,
today, um, online is a very efficient way to run a meeting if you've got the right tools.
yes,
In person is still a possibility and can be enhanced with those tools. Dual hybrid might be very complex unless you are a very large community or have very specific complex issues. Think
yes.
twice before taking that leap. Is that fair?
Exactly, and bring in the experts to help out. Otherwise, it can be a nightmare versus, a dream. Like people can that go to the really good, well-run ones, they're like, "Wow, we want to do this every time. This was great," right? But the ones that go to the ones that aren't run well, don't have the proper solutions and people with the experience, then, they're like, "Oh, I don't want to do this again. I want to do either online only or in person only."
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for that. Everyone, go to propertyflute.ca, learn more about the company, see those tools, the free option available to you if you're a small strata, what it takes to get Ryan and the team involved to help you administer one. Um, Before we wrap, Ryan, I should mention that next week I'm going to be joined by Phil Dugan of Citadel Law. We're
Oh,
going to be
excellent.
discussing dealing with challenging owners, best practices for what to do. With the legal perspective, we were originally going to have a property manager who has a scheduling conflict join. So it
Mm,
might be a topic we visit twice, once from the
yeah.
legal perspective and once from the property managers. But a good topic, one that I think most stratas at some
Mhm.
point find themselves dealing with,
Yes.
which is a slightly challenging owner. And anyway, that's not for the subject of meetings. There's enough challenges that happen with those. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and, take care and
We'll see you again
keep
soon.
on, yeah, doing the best for Stratus. Take care. Bye.